Chapter 9. The Evening of the Betrothal. Villefort, as we mentioned, had set out to return to the Place du Grand Cour, and, on arriving back at the house de Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, discovered that the guests he had left at the table were now taking coffee in the drawing-room. Renée was waiting for him with a great impatience, shared by the rest of the company, and he was greeted with general acclaim. "How now, head-cutter, pillar of the state, royalist Brutist," cried one. "Tell us what's up." "Yes, are we threatened with a new reign of terror?" asked another. "Has the Corsican ogre come forth from his cave?" asked a third. "Madame la Marquise," said Villefort, going over to his future mother-in-law, "I have come to ask you to excuse me for being obliged to leave you in this way. Marquis, could I beg the favor of a word or two in private?" "Oh, so it really is serious?" the Marquise asked, seeing the cloud that had settled on Villefort's brow. "So much so that I have to take my leave of you for a few days." He turned towards Renée. "So you can understand that the matter must be serious indeed." "You're going away?" Renée exclaimed, unable to hide her feelings at this unexpected news. "Alas, mademoiselle, I must," Villefort replied. "And where are you going?" the Marquise asked. "That, madame, must remain a secret under the law. However, if anyone has a message for Paris, one of my friends is leaving for there tonight and will be delighted to undertake the errand." Everybody exchanged glances. "You asked for a moment of my time," the Marquis said. "Yes, if you please. Let's go to your study." The Marquis took Villefort's arm and they went out. "Now, tell me what this is about," he asked when they reached the study. "Something that I believe to be of the utmost importance, which requires my immediate departure for Paris. Marquis, excuse my bluntness and indiscretion, but do you have any government stock?" "My whole fortune is in bonds, around 6,000 or 7,000 francs." "Then sell them, Marquise, sell them or you are ruined." "But how can I sell them from here?" "Well, you have a broker, don't you?" "Yes." "Well, give me a letter for him, so that he can sell without losing a minute or even a second. Even so, I may be too late." "Damn!" the Marquis exclaimed. "Let's not waste time." And he sat down at a table and wrote a letter to his broker, instructing him to sell at any price. "Now that I have this letter," Villefort said, folding it and putting it carefully into his pocketbook, "I need another." "For whom?" "For the king." "The king?" "Yes. But I dare not take it upon myself to write to his majesty." "I'm not asking you to do so yourself, but to request it of Monsieur de Salvieux. He must give me a letter that will allow me to approach his majesty without having to go through all the formalities of requesting an audience, which might waste valuable time." "Well, what about the Lord Chancellor, who has free access to the Tuileries? Through him you could contact the king at any time of the day or night." "No doubt, but why should someone else share the credit for the news that I carry? Do you follow me? The Chancellor would naturally relegate me to a subordinate role and deprive me of any benefit that I might obtain in the matter. I can tell you only one thing, Marquise. My career is guaranteed if I can arrive first at the Tuileries, because I shall have done the king a service that he will be unable to forget." "Well, in that case, dear boy, go and pack. I shall call de Salvieux and ask him to write a letter that will act as your passport to his majesty. Pray lose no time, for I must be in my chaise within a quarter of an hour. Have the carriage draw up in front of the door." "Well, of course. Please make my excuses to the Marquise, and Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, for whom, today of all days, I part with the profoundest regret. Well, they will both be waiting in the study for you to make your own farewells. Well, thank you 100 times. Look after my letter." The Marquis rang, and the servant appeared. "Tell the Comte de Salvieux that I am expecting him. Now, you must go," he added to Villefort. "I shall be back immediately." Villefort ran out, but on reaching the door, realized that the sight of a deputy crown prosecutor in such a hurry could upset the tranquility of an entire town, so he slowed to his normal pace, which was quite magisterial. At his front door, he saw a pale, ghost-like figure waiting for him, upright and motionless in the shadows. It was the lovely young Catalan who, having no news of Edmond, had slipped out of the district around the Faro at nightfall to come in person to see if she could discover the reason for her lover's arrest. When Villefort approached, she stepped out of the shadow of the wall against which she was leaning, and barred his path. Dantes had told the prosecutor about his fiancée, and Villefort recognized Mercedes without giving her name. He was surprised at the beauty and dignity of the woman, and when she asked him what had become of her lover, he felt as though he was the defendant and she was the judge. "The man of whom you speak," he replied brusquely, is a major criminal, and I can do nothing for him, mademoiselle." Mercedes could not repress a sob, and, as Villefort tried to go past, stopped him again. "At least tell me where he is, so that I can find out if he's alive or dead." "I don't know. He's no longer my responsibility," Villefort replied, and, embarrassed by her keen look and attitude of entreaty, he pushed Mercedes aside and went in, slamming the door as though to shut out the sorrow that she had brought him. But the sorrow is not so easily put aside. The stricken man carried it with him like the fatal stamp of which Virgil speaks. Villefort went in and closed the door, but when he reached the living room, his legs too gave way beneath him, and he let out a sigh that was more like a sob, and slumped into a chair. Now, in the depths of that sick heart, the first seeds of a mortal abscess began to spread. That man whom he was sacrificing to his own ambition, that innocent man who was paying the price for the guilt of Villefort's father, appeared before him, pale and menacing, clasping the hand of a fiancée who was no less pale, and bearing remorse in his train, not the remorse that makes its victims leap up like a Roman raging against his fate, but that bitter, muffled blow that intermittently chimes on the soul and sears it with the memory of some past action, an agonizing wound that lacerates deeper and deeper until death. Even now there was a moment's hesitation in his heart. Many times before he had called for the death penalty, with no more emotion than aroused by the contest between the accuser and the accused, and these convicts, who had gone to their deaths because of the thundering eloquence with which he had convinced the judges or the jury, had left no shadow on his brow. They had been guilty, or at least so Villefort believed. This time, however, it was a different matter. He had just condemned a man to perpetual incarceration, but an innocent man, poised on the brink of good fortune, depriving him of not only of freedom but also of happiness. He was not a judge this time, but an executioner. And when he thought of that, he felt the muffled blow that was described, something that he had not previously experienced, sounding in the depths of his heart and filling his breast with a vague feeling of apprehension. Thus a wounded man will be put on his guard by a powerful and instinctive prescience of pain and tremble whenever his finger approaches the site of an open bleeding wound for as long as it remains unhealed. But the wound that Villefort had suffered was one that would not heal, or one that would not close, only to reopen, more bloody and more painful than before. If at that moment René's sweet voice had sounded in his ear, calling for clemency, or if the lovely Mercedes had come in and said, "In the name of the God who sees us and judges us, give me back my betrothed," then, surely, that brow, already half prepared to submit to the inevitable, would have bent altogether, and he would no doubt have taken the pen in his numbed fingers and, despite the risk to himself, signed the order to set Dantes free. But no voice spoke in the silence, and the door opened only to Villefort's valet de chambre, who had come in to tell him that the post horses were harnessed to his barouche. He got up, or rather leapt up, like a man resolving some inner struggle, ran across to his writing desk, emptied the gold from one of its drawers into its pockets, paced distractedly around his room for a moment, with his hand on his forehead, muttering incomprehensibly. Then at last, feeling the coat which his valet had just put across his shoulders, went out, sprang into his carriage, and snapped out the order to stop off at Monsieur de Saint-Méran's in the Rue de Grandcourt. The sentence on the unhappy Dantes was confirmed. As Monsieur de Saint-Méran promised, Villefort found the Marquise and Renée in her study. The young man shuddered on seeing Renée, thinking that she might once more ask him to set Dantes free. But alas, it must be said, to the discredit of the self-centered humankind, that the beautiful young woman was concerned with only one thing, Villefort's departure. She loved Villefort, and he was leaving at the very moment when he was about to become her husband. He could not tell her when he would return, and Renée, instead of feeling pity for Dantes, was cursing the man whose crime was the cause of her separation from her lover. So there was nothing Mercedes could say. On the corner of the Rue de la Loge, poor Mercedes had met Fernand, who was now following her. She had returned to Les Catalans and thrown herself on the bed with an extremity of She had returned to Les Catalans and thrown herself on the bed in an extremity of desperation. Fernand knelt beside the bed and, clasping an icy hand that Mercedes did not think to take from him, covered it with an ardent kiss that Mercedes did not even feel. So she spent the night. The lamp went out when the oil was exhausted, but she no more noticed the darkness than she had noticed the light. When the day returned, she was unaware of that also. Sorrow had covered her eyes with a blindfold that showed her only Edmond. "Ah, it's you," she said, finally, turning towards Fernand. "I have not left your side since yesterday," he replied with a pitiful sigh. Monsieur Morel would not admit defeat. He had learned that Dantes had been taken to prison after being questioned, so he hastened to see all of his friends and visit anyone in Marseille who might have some influence there. But already the rumor was spreading that the young man had been arrested as a Bonapartist agent. Since at that time even the most daring considered any attempt by Napoleon to recover the throne as an insane fantasy, Monsieur Morel was greeted everywhere with the indifference, fear, or rejection, and returned home in despair, admitting that the position was serious and that no one could do anything about it. Caderousse, for his part, was deeply disturbed and troubled. Instead of following Monsieur Morel's example, going out and attempting to do something for Dantes, which was in any case impossible, he shut himself down with 2 bottles of cassis and tried to drown his anxiety in drunkenness. But such was his state of mind that 2 bottles were not enough to extinguish his thoughts. So he remained, too drunk to fetch any more wine, not drunk enough to forget, seated in front of 2 empty bottles, with his elbows on a rickety table, watching all the spectres that Hoffmann scattered across manuscripts moist with punch, dancing like a cloud of fantastic black dust in the shadows thrown by his long wicked candle. Danglars was alone, but neither troubled nor disturbed. Danglars was even happy, because he had taken revenge on an enemy that insured himself the place on board of the Pharaon that he had feared he might lose. Danglars was one of those calculating men who are born with a pen behind their ear and an inkwell instead of a heart. To him, everything in this world was a subtraction or multiplication, and a numeral was much dearer than a man, when it was a numeral that would increase the total, while a man might reduce it. So Danglars had gone to bed at his usual hour and slept quite peacefully. Villefort, after receiving the letter from M. de Salvieux, had embraced Renée on both cheeks, kissed the hand of Madame de Saint-Méran, and shaken that of the Marquis, and he was traveling post-haste along the road for Aix. Dantes' father was perishing from grief and anxiety, and as for Edmond, we know what had become of him. Chapter 10. The Little Cabinet in the Tuileries. Let us leave Villefort going hell for leather down the road to Paris, having paid for extra horses at every stage, and precede him through 2 or 3 rooms into the little cabinet at the Tuileries, with its arched window, famous for having been the favorite study of Napoleon and King Louis XVIII, and today for being that of King Louis Philippe. Here, seated in front of a walnut table that he had brought back from Hartwell, to which, by one of those foibles usual among great men, he was especially partial, King Louis XVIII was listening without particular attention to a man of between 50 and 52 years, gray-haired with aristocratic features and meticulously turned out, while at the same time making marginal notes in a volume of Horace, the Griffius edition, much admired, but often inaccurate, which used to contribute more than a little to His Majesty's learned observations on philology. You were saying, monsieur, the king asked, that I feel deeply disquieted, sire. Really? Have you by any chance dreamt of 7 fat and 7 lean cows? No, sire, for that would presage only 7 years of fertility and 7 years of famine. And with a king as far-sighted as your majesty, we have no need to fear of famine. So what other scourge might afflict us, my dear Blacas? I have every reason to believe, sire, that there is a storm brewing from the direction of the south. And I, my dear Duke, replied Louis XVIII, think you are very ill-informed, because I know for a fact, on the contrary, that the weather down there is excellent. Despite being a man of some wit, Louis XVIII liked to indulge a facsimile of humor. Sire, Monsieur de Blacas continued, if only to reassure his faithful servant, might your majesty not send some trusty men to Languedoc, to Provence, and to Dauphine, to give him a report on the feelings of these provinces? Canamus sur 10, the king replied, carrying on with the annotations of his Horace. And the courtier laughed, to give the impression that he understood the phrase from the poet of Venusia. Your majesty may well be perfectly correct to trust the loyalty of the French, but I think I might not be altogether wrong to anticipate some desperate adventure. By whom? By Bonaparte, or at least those of his faction. My dear Blacas, said the king, you are interrupting my work with your horrid tales. And you, sire, are keeping me from sleep, with fears for your safety. One moment, my good friend, wait one moment. I have here a most precipitous note on the line of Pastor Quum de Terriet. Let me finish it, and you can tell me afterwards. There was a brief silence while Louis XVIII, writing in his handwriting that he made as tiny as possible, wrote a new note in the margin of Horace. Then, when the note was written, he looked up with the satisfied air of a man who thinks he has made a discovery when he has commented on someone else's idea, and said, Carry on, my dear Duke, carry on, I am listening. Sire, said Blacas, who had briefly hoped to use Villefort to his own advantage, I have to tell you that this news troubles me. The news that troubles me is not some vague whisper. These are no mere unfounded rumors. A right-thinking man who has my entire confidence and was required by me to keep a watch on the south, the Duke hesitated as he said this, has just arrived, post-haste, to tell me that there is a great danger threatening the king. And so, sire, I came at once. Mala ducis avi domum, Louis XVIII continued, making another note. Is your majesty ordering me to say no more on this topic? No, my dear Duke, but stretch out your hand. Which one? Whichever you prefer, over there on the left. Here, sire. I tell you the left and you look on the right. I mean my left. There you have it. You should find a report from the Minister of Police with yesterday's date. But here is Monsieur d'André himself. Did you say Monsieur d'André, didn't you? Louis XVIII remarked, returning to the usher who had indeed announced the Minister of Police. Yes, sire. Monsieur le Baron d'André, the usher repeated. That's it, Baron, Louis continued, with a faint smile. Come in, Baron, and tell the Duke your most recent news about Monsieur de Bonaparte. Conceal nothing from us, however serious the situation may be. Let's see. Is not the island of Elba a volcano, and shall we see war burst from it, bristling and blazing, bella horrida bella? Monsieur d'André leant elegantly against the back of a chair, resting both hands upon it, and said, Was your majesty good enough to consult my report of yesterday's date? Yes, of course, but tell the Duke what was in that report, because he is unable to find it. Let him know everything that the usurper is doing on the island. Monsieur, the Baron said to the Duke, all His Majesty's servants should applaud the latest news that we have received from Elba. Bonaparte, Monsieur d'André turned to Louis, who was busy writing a note and did not even look up. Bonaparte, the Baron continued, is bored to death. He spends whole days watching his miners work at Porto Longone. And he scratches himself as a distraction, said the king. He scratches himself, the Duke said. What does your Majesty mean? Yes, indeed, my dear Duke. Have you forgotten that this great man, this hero, this demigod, is driven to distraction by a skin ailment, perigro? There is more, Monsieur le Duc, said the Minister of Police. We are almost certain that the usurper will shortly be mad. Mad? Utterly. His head is softening. Sometimes he weeps bitterly, at others he laughs hysterically. On some occasions he spends hours sitting on the shore playing at ducks and drakes. When a pebble makes 5 or 6 leaps, he seems as satisfied as though he has won another battle of Marengo or Austerlitz. You must agree that these are signs of folly. Or of wisdom, Monsieur le Baron, or of wisdom, said Louis, with a laugh. The great captains of antiquity used to replenish their spirits by playing at ducks and drakes. See Plutarch's Life of Scipio Africanus. Monsieur de Blacas was left speechless between these two forms of unconcern. Villefort, who had not wished to tell him everything, in order to prevent anyone else from taking away all the advantage that he might gain from his secret, had nonetheless told him enough to make him very anxious. Go on, Dandré, go on, said Louis. Blacas is not yet convinced. Tell him about the usurper's conversion. The Minister of Police bowed. The usurper's conversion, muttered the Duke, looking from the king to Dandré, who were speaking their parts alternately like two Virgilian shepherds. Had the usurper been converted? Absolutely, my dear Duke. To the right principles. Explain it, Baron. Well, here's the truth of the matter, Duke, the minister said, with the greatest gravity in the world. Napoleon recently reviewed his men, and when 2 or 3 of his old Grand Gardes, as he called them, expressed a wish to return to France, he gave them leave and urged them to serve their good king. Those were his own words, Monsieur le Duc, I am assured of it. So now, Blacas, what do you think? The king asked triumphantly, turning his attention for a moment from the scholarly tome that lay open beside him. I say, sire, that either the Minister of Police is mistaken or I am. But since it is impossible for you to be God damn it. But since it is impossible for it to be the Minister of Police who is responsible for preserving your Majesty's safety and honor, then I am probably the one who is wrong. However, sire, in your Majesty's place, I should wish to question the person about whom I spoke. I would even insist that your Majesty do him this honor. Certainly, Duke, I am at your insistence. I shall receive whomever you wish, but I should like to do so fully armed. Minister, do you have yet a more recent report than this one? This is dated February the 20th, and it is already now March the 3rd. No, sire, but I have been expecting one at any minute. I have been out since early this morning, and it may have arrived in my absence. Go to the prefecture and make sure, and if it is not there, Louis continued laughing, make one. Isn't that the procedure? Oh, sire, the minister exclaimed, thank heaven on that score there is no need to invent anything. Each day brings the most circumstantial denunciations pouring into our offices, the work of a host of miserable wretches who are hoping for a little gratitude for services that they do not render, much as they would like to. They wager on chance, in the hope that one day an unexpected event will give some sort of reality to their predictions. Very well, then go, monsieur, Louis said, and remember that I shall be awaiting your return. Well, I shall not tarry, sire. I shall return in 10 minutes. And I, sire, shall go and fetch my messenger, said Blacas. Wait, the king said. Blacas, I really must change your coat of arms. I shall give you an eagle with wings extended, grasping in its claws a prey that is trying to escape with this device, tenax. I am listening, sire, said Monsieur Blacas, wringing his hands in impatience. I should like to consult you about this text. Molli fugiens anhelitu. You know, it concerns the stag fleeing the wolf. You are a great huntsman, I believe, and an expert on wolves. In both those capacities, what do you think of this Molly Enahiltu? Admirable, sire, but my messenger is like the stag that you mention, for he has only just covered 200 leagues by road in barely 3 days. He has expended a lot of energy and a lot of trouble, my dear Duke, when we have the telegraph that only takes 3 or 4 hours, and does so without making one in the slightest bit of breath. Sire, this is meagre reward for a poor young man who has come so far with such ardor to give your Majesty some important news. If only for the sake of Monsieur de Salvieux, who has recommended him to me, I beg you to receive him well. Monsieur de Salvieux, my brother's chamberlain, the ruler of the island of Elba, I flipped 2 pages. Monsieur de Salvieux, my brother's chamberlain, the same, but he is in Marseille. He writes to me from there. Well, does he speak to you of this conspiracy? No, but he recommends Monsieur de Villefort to me and instructs me to bring him to your Majesty's presence. Monsieur de Villefort, cried the king. Is this messenger called Monsieur de Villefort? Yes, sire. And is he the one who has come from Marseille? In person. Why did you not tell me this at once? The king asked, with a faint shadow of anxiety appearing on his face. Sire, I thought that your Majesty would not know the name. Not so, Blacas, not so. He is a serious young man, well-bred and above all ambitious. And heavens, do you know his father's name? His father? Yes, Nortier. Nortier the Girondin? Nortier the senator? Precisely. And your Majesty has given employment to the son of such a man. Blacas, my friend, you understand nothing. I told you that Villefort was ambitious to make his way. Villefort will sacrifice everything, even his father. So I should let him enter, sire. This very moment, Duke, where is he? He must be awaiting for me below in my carriage. Go and fetch him. Immediately. And the Duke left with the vivacity of a young man, the warmth of his sincere royalism taking 20 years off his age. Left alone, Louis turned back to his half-opened Horace and murmured, Justum e tanissem propositi virum. Monsieur de Blacas came back up the stairs as fast as he had gone down them, but in the antechamber he was obliged to appeal to the king's authority. Villefort's dusty coat and his general appearance, bearing no relation to the dress of the court, had offended the sensibilities of Monsieur de Brezé, who was astonished that any young man should have the audacity to appear in such clothing before the king. But the Duke brushed aside his objections with a single phrase, His Majesty's orders, and, through the master of ceremonies, continued to mutter his objections. For form's sake, Villefort was ushered into the royal presence. The king was sitting exactly where the Duke had left him. On opening the door, Villefort found himself directly opposite him, and the young lawyer's first impulse was to stop dead. Come in, Monsieur de Villefort, the king said. Come in. Villefort bowed and took a few steps forward, waiting for the king to question him. Monsieur de Villefort, the king went on, the Duc de Blacas claims that you have something important to tell us. Sire, the Duke is right, and I hope that your Majesty will acknowledge the same. Firstly, before anything else, monsieur, is the problem as serious in your opinion as I have been led to believe? Sire, I believe that it is urgent, but I hope that, thanks to my efforts, it will not be irreparable. Take as long as you wish, monsieur, said the king, who was starting to succumb to the feelings that he had seen on Monsieur de Blacas's face, and which he had heard in the strained tones of Villefort's voice. Speak, and, above all, begin at the beginning. I like order in all things. Sire, Villefort said, I shall give your Majesty a faithful account, but I beg you to excuse me if, in my eagerness, I am unable to give you as clear an account as I should wish. And a rapid glance at the king, after this ingratiating preface, reassured Villefort of the benevolence of his august listener, and he continued. Sire, I have driven post-haste to Paris to inform your Majesty that, in the courses of my duty, I have discovered not one of those commonplace and inconsequential plots, the like of which are hatched daily in the lower ranks of people and of the army, but a veritable conspiracy, a whirlwind that threatens the very throne on which your majesty sits. The usurper is fitting out there 3 ships. He is contemplating some adventure that may perhaps be senseless, but none the less fearsome for all that. At this very moment he has surely left Elba. To go where, I do not know, but certainly with the intention of landing either at Naples or on the coast of Tuscany, or even France. Your Majesty must know that the ruler of the island of Elba has kept in contact with both Italy and France. Yes, monsieur, I do know, the king said, deeply troubled. Quite recently, we have been informed that the meetings of the Bonapartists have taken place in the Rue Saint-Jacques. But pray continue. How did you obtain this information? Sire, it is the result of an interrogation that I carried out on a man from Marseille, whom I have had under surveillance for some time, and arrested on the day of my departure. This man, a rebellious sailor whose Bonapartist sympathies I suspected, went secretly to the island of Elba. There he met the Grand Marshal, who entrusted him with a verbal message for a Bonapartist in Paris, whose name I was not able to make him divulge. However, the message was that the Bonapartist was ordered to prepare his supporters for a return. You understand that these are the words of the interrogation, sire, for a return that cannot fail to take place shortly. And where is the man? Louis asked. In prison, sire. You believe the matter to be serious? So much so, sire, that although this event interrupted a family celebration on the very day of my betrothal, I left everything, my fiancé and my friends, putting all aside to hasten to see your majesty, both to inform you of my fears and to assure you of my loyal devotion. That's right, said Louis. There was some plan that you should marry Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, wasn't there? The daughter of one of your majesty's most faithful servants. Yes, but let us return to the plot, Monsieur Villefort. Sire, I fear that there is no longer merely a plot. I fear we are dealing with a conspiracy. The king smiled. A conspiracy nowadays is an easy matter to contemplate, but a harder one to put in practice, precisely because, having recently been restored to the throne of our ancestors, we have had our eyes fixed on the past, the present, and the future. In the past 10 months, my ministers have been doubly vigilant to ensure that the Mediterranean coast is well protected. If Bonaparte were to land at Naples, the entire coalition would be mobilized against him even before he reached Piombino. If he were to land in Tuscany, he would step on an enemy shore. If he were to land in France, it would be with a handful of men, and we should easily overcome him, hated as he is by the people. So have no fear, monsieur, but be assured, nonetheless, of our royal gratitude. Ah, here's Monsieur d'André, the Duc de Blacas exclaimed. At that moment, as he spoke, the Minister of Police appeared at the door, pale and trembling, staring vacantly as if dazed by a blinding flash of light. Villefort made to retire from the room, but Monsieur de Blacas clasped his hand to restrain him. Chapter 11. The Corsican Ogre. Louis XVIII, on seeing his ravaged face, thrust away the table before which he was sitting. "What's wrong with you, Baron?" he cried. "You seem thunderstruck. Do your troubled appearance and hesitant manner have anything to do with what Monsieur de Blacas was saying and what Monsieur de Villefort had confirmed to me?" Meanwhile, Monsieur de Blacas had made an urgent movement towards the Baron, but the courtier's terror got the best of the statesman's pride. In such circumstances, it was far preferable for him to be humiliated by the prefect of police than to humiliate him in view of what was at stake. "Sire," the Baron stammered. Come, said Louis. At this, the Minister of Police gave way to an onrush of despair and threw himself at the king's feet. Louis XVIII stepped back, raising his eyebrows. "Won't you say something?" he asked. "Oh, sire, what a terrible misfortune! What will become of me? I shall never recover from it." "Monsieur, I order you to speak," the king said. "Sire, the usurper left Elba on February 28th and landed on March the 1st. "Where?" the king said urgently. "In France, sire, in a little port on the Gulf Juan, near Antibes." The usurper landed in France near Antibes on the Gulf Yuan, 200 leagues from Paris, on March the 1st, and it is only today, March the 3rd, that you inform me of it. Well, monsieur, what you are telling me is impossible. Either you have been misinformed or you are mad. Alas, sire, it is only too true. Louis XVIII made a gesture of inexpressible anger and alarm, leaping to his feet, as though a sudden blow had struck him simultaneously in the heart and across the face. In France, he cried. The usurper is in France? But was no one watching the man? Who knows? Perhaps you were in league with him. Sire, no, the Duc de Blacas cried. A man like Monsieur d'André could never be accused of treason. We were all blind, sire, and the Minister of Police was as blind as the rest of us, nothing more. But, Villefort said, then he stopped dead in his tracks. I beg your forgiveness, sire, he said with a bow. My ardor carried me away. I beg your majesty to forgive me. Speak, monsieur, speak without fear. You alone warned us of this disease. Help us to find the cure. Sire, Villefort said, the usurper is hated in the south. It appears to me that if he risks his chances there, we can easily rouse Provence and Languedoc against him. No doubt we can, said the minister, but he is advancing through Gap and Sisteron. Advancing, said Louis. Is he marching on Paris, then? The Minister of Police said nothing, but his silence was as eloquent as a confession. What about the Dauphine? Said the king. The king asked Villefort. Do you think we could raise a resistance there as in Provence? Sire, I regret to inform your majesty of an impalpable truth. Feeling in Dauphiné was not as favorable to us as it is in Provence and Languedoc. The mountain dwellers are Bonapartists, sire. So, his intelligence is good, Louis XVIII muttered. How many men does he have with him? I do not know, sire, said the Minister of Police. How do you mean you do not know? Did you forget to find that out in detail? It is a trivial matter, of course, he added, with a disdainful smile. I was unable to learn it, sire. The dispatch contained only the news of the landing and the route taken by the usurper. And how did you come by this dispatch? The minister hung his head and blushed brightly. By the telegraph, sire, he stammered. Louis XVIII stepped forward and crossed his arms, as Napoleon would have done. You mean, he said, going pale with rage, that 7 armies overthrew that man, a divine miracle replaced me on the throne of my fathers after 25 years in exile, and during those 25 years I studied, sounded out, and analyzed the men and all the affairs of this country of France that was promised to me, only to obtain the object of my desires, and for a force that I held in the palm of my hand to explode and destroy me. It is fate, sire, the minister muttered, realizing that such a weight, though light in the scales of destiny, was enough to crush a man. So it is true, what our enemies say about us, nothing learned, nothing forgotten. If I had been betrayed as he was, then that might be after all some consolation. But to be surrounded by people whom I've raised to high office, who should consider my safety more precious than their own, because their interests depend on me, people who were nothing before me, and will be nothing after, and to perish miserably through inefficiency and ineptitude. Oh yes, monsieur, you are right indeed, that is fate. The minister was crushed beneath the weight of this terrifying indictment. Monsieur de Blacas wiped a damp brow with sweat, and Villefort smiled to himself, because he felt his own importance swelling. To fall, Louis continued, having immediately realized the depth of the gulf above which the monarchy was tottering, to fall and to learn of one's fall through the telegraph. Oh, I should rather mount the scaffold like my brother Louis XVI than to descend the steps of the Tuileries in this way, driven out by ridicule. Monsieur, you do not know what ridicule means in France, and yet if anyone ought to know... Sire, the minister mumbled, sire, for pity's sake. And the king turned to the young man who was standing, motionless at the back of the room, following the progress of this conversation on which hung the fate of the kingdom. Come here, Monsieur de Villefort. Come, and tell this gentleman that it was possible to have foreknowledge of everything despite his ignorance of it. Sire, it was materially impossible to guess at plans which that man had hidden from everybody. Materially impossible. Those are grand words, monsieur. Unfortunately, grand words are like grand gentlemen. I have taken measure of both. Materially impossible. For a minister who had his officials, his offices, his agents, his informers, his spies, and 1,500,000 francs of secret funds to know what is happening 60 leagues off the coast of France. Come, come, here is a gentleman who has had none of these resources at his disposal. This gentleman, a simple magistrate, who knew more than you did with all of your police force, and who would have saved my crown if, like you, he had the right to operate the telegraph. The Minister of Police turned with an expression of profound acrimony towards Villefort, who lowered his head with the modesty of triumph. I am not saying this for you, Blacas, Louis XVIII went on. Even though you discovered nothing, you did at least have the good sense to persevere in your suspicions. Anyone else might have thought Monsieur de Villefort's revelations insignificant, or else the product of some self-serving ambition. The last was an allusion to what the Minister of Police had said with such confidence an hour earlier. Villefort understood the king's strategy. Another person might have been carried away, intoxicated by this flattery, but he was afraid of making a mortal enemy of the minister, despite knowing that the man was doomed, because even though, at the height of his power, the minister had been unable to guess Napoleon's secret, in the final death throes of his fall he might discover Villefort's. He only had to question Dantes. So Villefort came to the man's aid instead of adding to his misery. Sire, Villefort said, the swiftness of events proves to your majesty that only God, by raising a storm, could have forestalled them. What your majesty attributes to this profound precipitity on my part is surely and purely simply the outcome of chance. All I have done is to use what chance put in my way as a devoted subject. Do not give me more credit than I deserve, sire, and you will never have to revise your first opinion of me. The Minister of Police thanked the young man with a look, and Villefort knew that his plan had succeeded. Having lost none of the king's gratitude, he had just made a friend on whom he could count should need be. Very well, the king said. Then, turning to Monsieur de Blacas and the king... Very well, said the king. Then, turning to Monsieur de Blacas and the Minister of Police. Now, gentlemen, I have no further need of you. You may go. What has been done from now falls within the province of the Minister of War. Thank you, sire. We can count on the army, said Monsieur de Blacas. Your Majesty knows that every report speaks of his devotion to your Majesty's government. Don't speak to me of reports, Duke. I know how much faith I should put in them. But on that subject, Monsieur le Baron, what further news do you have about the matter of the Rue de Saint-Jacques? The matter of the Rue de Saint-Jacques, Villefort exclaimed, unable to contain himself. Then he stopped short and said, Forgive me, sire. My devotion to your Majesty continually makes me forget, not the respect that I feel for you, which is too deeply engraved on my heart, but the rules of etiquette. You may speak out, monsieur, said Louis. Today you have earned the right to ask questions. Sire, said the Minister of Police, I was on the point of giving your Majesty new information that I have gathered about this, when your Majesty's attention was distracted by the terrible disaster on the coast. This information can be of no further interest to His Majesty. On the contrary, monsieur, this affair seems to me to relate directly to the one uppermost in our minds, and General Quesnel's death may perhaps put us on the trail of an important internal conspiracy. Villefort shuddered at this mention of General Quesnel. Indeed, sire, the Minister of Police continued, everything suggests that he was the victim, not of suicide at first thought, but of murder. It appears that General Quesnel was coming from a Bonapartist club when he disappeared. A stranger had visited him the same morning and made an appointment with him in the Rue de Saint-Jacques. Unfortunately, the valet, who was doing the general's hair at the time when the stranger was shown into his dressing room, clearly heard him mention the Rue de Saint-Jacques, but he could not remember the number. While the Minister of Police was giving this information to the king, Villefort, who appeared to hang on his every word, blushed red, then went pale. The king turned to him. "Don't you agree with me, Monsieur de Villefort, that General Quesnel, who might have been thought to have been a supporter of the usurper, but who is in reality entirely loyal to me, was the victim of an ambush by the Bonapartists?" "It seems entirely probable, sire," said Villefort. "Is nothing more known?" "We were tracking down the man who made the appointment with him." "Tracking him down?" Villefort repeated. "Yes, the servant gave us a description. He is a man of between 50 and 55 years old, with dark eyes overhung by bushy eyebrows and a mustache. He was dressed in a blue frock coat and wore the rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor in his buttonhole. A man who precisely answers to this description was followed yesterday, but my agent lost him at the corner of the Rue de la Jussienne and the Coq-Terron." Villefort leant against the back of a chair, and, while the Minister of Police was speaking, felt his legs give way beneath him, but when he heard that the stranger had evaded his pursuer, he breathed again. "You must track this man down, monsieur," the king told the Minister of Police. "If, as everything leads me to believe, General Quesnel, who has been so helpful to us at this time, was a victim of murder, whether or not by the Bonapartists, I wish his assassins to be cruelly punished." Villefort needed all his self-control to avoid showing the terror he felt on the king's words. "How odd it is," the king continued, with a gesture that expressed his irritation. "The police consider that they have said the last word on the matter when they announce that a murder has been committed, and that they have done everything when they add, we are tracking down the people responsible. On this, at least, I hope that your majesty will have satisfaction." "Very well, we shall see. I shall keep you no longer, baron. Monsieur de Villefort, you must be tired after your journey. Go and rest. You are doubtless staying with your father?" And a cloud passed in Villefort's eyes. "No, sire, I am staying at the Hôtel de Madrid in the Rue de Tournon." "You've seen him, I suppose?" "I asked to be taken directly to the Duc de Blacas, sire." "But you will see him nonetheless?" "I think not, sire." "Ah, yes, of course," Louis XVIII said with a smile, indicating that there had been a motive behind his repeated questionings. "I was forgetting the coldness in your relations with Monsieur Noirtier, and that this is another sacrifice you have made to the royal cause, for which I must compensate you." "Sire, the expression of your majesty's goodwill is a reward that so far exceeds my ambitions, and I can have nothing further to ask of my king." "No matter, monsieur, have no fear. We shall not forget you. And meanwhile," and the king unpinned the cross of the Legion of Honor, which normally he wore on his blue coat, next to the cross of Saint Louis, and above the medal of the Order de Notre-Dame du Mont Carmel et Saint-Lazare, and, giving it to Villefort, said, "Meanwhile, take this cross." "But sire," Villefort said, "your majesty is mistaken. This is the cross of an officer of the Legion." "So be it, monsieur," said Louis. "Take it for what it is. I have no time to request another. Blacas, ensure that the certificate is delivered to Monsieur de Villefort." "And now," he asked, "what orders do I have the honor to receive from your majesty?" "Take the rest that you need, and consider that, while you have no power to serve me in Paris, you can be of the greatest service to me in Marseille." Villefort bowed. "Sire, in an hour I shall have left for Paris." "Go then, monsieur, and if I should forget you, for the memory of kings is short, do not hesitate to make yourself known to me. Monsieur le Baron, give the order to fetch the Minister of War. Blacas, stay here." "Monsieur," said the the Minister of Police said to Villefort as they were leaving the Tuileries. You have come through the right door, and your fortune is made. How long will it last? Villefort murmured, taking leave of the minister, whose career was finished, and looking for a cab to take him home. One passed along the quay, and Villefort waved it down, and the cab drew over. He gave his address to the driver and leapt inside, where he abandoned himself to his ambitious dreams. 10 minutes later he was home. He ordered his horses to be prepared for him to leave in 2 hours, and asked for dinner to be served. He was about to sit down at the table when a firm, clear ring sounded at the door. The valet went to open it, and Villefort heard someone speak his name. Who can know that I came here so soon? He wondered. And at that very moment, the valet returned. What is it? Villefort answered. Who was that ringing? Who is asking for me? A stranger who will not give his name. And what anonymous stranger is that? What does he want? He wishes to speak to monsieur. To me? Yes. He asked for me by name. Certainly. And what does the stranger look like? He's a man around 50, monsieur. Short, tall, around the same size as monsieur. Fair or dark? Dark, very dark, with black hair, black eyes, and black eyebrows. And dressed? Villefort demanded urgently. How is he dressed? In a long blue frock coat buttoned down from top to bottom with the decoration of the Legion of Honor. It is he, Villefort murmured, going pale. By heaven, the person whose description he had been given twice appeared on his doorstep. This is a fine way to treat a man. Is it the custom in Marseille for a son to keep his father waiting at the door? Father, Villefort exclaimed, so I was not wrong. I guessed that it must be you. If you guessed as much, the newcomer remarked, putting his cane in a corner and his hat on a chair, then permit me to remark, my dear Gerard, that it is most unfriendly of you to keep me waiting like this. Leave us, Germain, said Villefort, and the servant went out with obvious signs of astonishment. Chapter 12. Father and Son. Monsieur Noirtier, for this was the man who had just entered, kept an eye on the servant until the door had closed. Then, doubtless fearing that he might be listening in the antechamber, he went and opened it again behind him. This was no vain precaution, and the speed of the Germain's retreat proved that he was no stranger to the sin that caused the downfall of our first parents. Monsieur Noirtier then took the trouble to go himself and shut the door of the antechamber, returned and shut that of the bedroom, slid the bolts, and went over to take Villefort's hand. The young man, meanwhile, had not been following these maneuvers with the surprise for which he had not yet recovered. How now? Do you know, dear Gerard, Noirtier said, looking at his son with an ambiguous smile, that you do not appear altogether overjoyed at seeing me? On the contrary, father, I am delighted, but your visit is so unexpected that I'm somewhat dazed by it. My dear friend, Noirtier continued, taking a seat, I might say the same myself. How is this? You tell me that you are getting engaged in Marseille on the 28th of February, and on March the 3rd you are in Paris. If I am here, father, said Gerard, going across to Monsieur Noirtier, do not complain about it. I came for your sake, and this journey may perhaps save your life. Indeed, said Monsieur Noirtier, casually leaning back in the chair where he was sitting. Indeed. Tell me about it, Monsieur le Magistrat. I am most curious. Have you heard about a certain Bonapartist club that meets in the Rue de Saint-Jacques? At number 53? Yes, I'm its vice president. Father, I'm amazed by your composure. Well, what do you expect, dear boy? When one has been proscribed by the Montagnards, left in Paris in a hay cart, and had been hunted across the moorlands of Bordeaux by Robespierre's bloodhounds, is most inured to most things. So continue. What has happened in this club in the Rue de Saint-Jacques? What has happened is that General Quesnel was called to it, and that General Quesnel, having left home at 9 in the evening, was pulled out of the Seine 2 days later. And who told you this fine story? The king himself. Well now, in exchange for your story, I have some news to tell you. Father, I think I already know what you are about to say. Ah, so you know already about the landing of His Majesty the Emperor. I beg you not to say such things, Father, firstly for your own sake, then for mine. I did know this piece of news. I knew it even before you did, because over the past 3 days I've been pounding the road between Marseille and Paris, raging at my inability to protect the thought that was burning through my skull and send it 200 leagues ahead of me. 3 days ago? Are you mad? The Emperor had not landed 3 days ago. No matter, I knew of his plans. How did you know? From a letter addressed to you from the island of Elba. To me? To you. I intercepted the messenger's wallet. If that letter had fallen into another's hands, Father, you might already have had been shot. And Villefort's father burst out laughing. Come, come, it seems that the Restoration has taken lessons from the Empire on how to expedite matters. Shot, my dear boy, you are being carried away. Where is this letter? I know you better than to imagine you would leave it lying around. Well, I burned it, to make sure that not a scrap remained. That letter was your death warrant. And a death knell to your future career, Noirtier replied coldly. Yes, I understand that, but I have nothing to fear, since you are protecting me. I have done better still, monsieur. I have saved you. The devil you have. This is becoming more dramatic still. Explain what you mean. I am again referring to the club in the Rue Saint-Jacques. The gentlemen of police seem most attached to this club. Why did they not look more carefully? They would have found it. They have not yet found it, but they are on the trail. Ah, that's the usual phrase, I know. When the police are at a loss, they say they're on a trail, and the government waits patiently until they come and whisper that the trail has gone cold. Yes, but they have found a body. General Canel was killed, and in every country in the world, that is called murder. Murder, you say? But there is nothing to prove that the general was murdered. People are found every day in the Seine, where they threw themselves in despair or drowned because they could not swim. Father, you know very well that the general did not drown. Father, you know very well that the general did not drown himself in despair, and that no one bathes in the Seine in January. No, make no mistake. His death has been indeed attributed to murder. And who made this attribution? The king himself. The king? I thought him enough of a philosopher to realize that there is no such thing as murder in politics. You know as well as I do, dear boy, that in politics there are no people, only ideas. No feelings, only interests. In politics, you don't kill a man, you remove an obstacle, and that's all. Do you want to know what happened? I'll tell you. We thought we could count on General Canel. He had been recommended to us from the island of Elba. One of us went round to his house and invited him to attend a meeting in the Rue Saint-Jacques where he would be among friends. He came and was told the whole plan. Departure from the island of Elba, the intended landing place, and then he had listened to everything and heard everything, and there was no more for him to learn, and he announced that he was a royalist. At this, we all looked at one another. We obliged him to take an oath, and he did so, but truly with such little good grace that it was tempting God to swear in that way. In spite of all, however, we let him go freely, quite freely, and he did not return home. What do you expect, my dear? He left us, and must have taken the wrong road, that's all. A murder, really, Villefort. You surprise me. You, a deputy crown prosecutor, making an accusation founded on such poor evidence. Have I told you, when you have done your job as a royalist, and had the head cut off of one of our people, my son, you have committed murder? No. I have said, very well, monsieur, you have fought and won, but tomorrow we shall have our revenge. Father, beware, our revenge will be terrible when we take it. I don't understand. Are you counting on the usurper's return? Well, I confess I am, yes. You are wrong, father. He will no sooner have gotten 10 leagues into France than he will be pursued, hunted down, and captured like a wild animal. My good friend, the Emperor is at this moment on the road for Grenoble. On the 10th or the 12th, he will be in Lyon, and on the 20th or the 25th in Paris. The people will rise up to march before him. He has only a handful of men with him, and they will send armies against him, which will provide an escort for him to return to the capital. The truth, my dear Gerard, is that you are still only a child. You think you are well informed because the telegraph told you, 3 days after the landing, the usurper has landed at Cannes with a few men. He is being pursued. But where is he? What is he doing? You have no idea. He is being pursued, that's all you know. Well, they'll pursue him as far as Paris without firing a shot. Grenoble and Lyon are two loyal cities which offer an invincible barricade against him. Grenoble will open its doors and acclaim him. The whole of Lyon will march in his van. Believe me, we are as well informed as you are, and our police are at least as equal as yours. Do you want proof? Here it is. You've tried to hide your journey from me, yet I knew about your arrival half an hour before you entered Paris. You gave your address to no one except for your postilion, and yet I know your address, and to prove it, I arrived here at the very moment when you were sitting down to eat. So ring for your servant to set another place, and we shall dine together. I have to admit, replied Villefort, looking at his father with astonishment, you seem very well informed. Heavens, it's simple enough. You people who hold power only know what can be bought for money. We, who are waiting to gain power, have what is given out of devotion. Devotion? Villefort laughed. Yes, devotion. That's the honest way to describe ambition when it has expectations. Villefort's father stretched out his own hand towards the bell pull to call for the servant, since his son would not do it. Villefort restrained him. Father, wait. Another word. Say it. However incompetent the royalist police may be, they do know one dreadful thing, which is the description of the man who visited General Quesnel on the day of his disappearance. Ah, the fine police know that, do they? And what is the description? Dark in coloring, black hair, side whiskers and eyes, a blue frock coat buttoned up to the chin, the rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor in his buttonhole, and a broad-brimmed hat and rattan cane. Aha, so they know all that, said Noirtier. In that case, why do they not have their hands on this man? Because they lost him, yesterday or the day before, on the corner of the Rue Coq-Héron. Didn't I tell you the police were idiots? Yes, but at any moment they may find him. Yes, Noirtier said, looking casually around him. Yes, if the man is not warned, but, he added, smiling, he has been warned, and he will change his appearance and his clothing. At these words, he got up, took off his coat and cravat, went over to a table on which everything was lying, ready for his son's toilet, took a razor, lathered his face, and, with a perfectly steady hand, shaved off the compromising side whiskers which had provided such a precious clue for the police. Villefort watched him with terror, not unmixed with admiration. Once he had finished shaving, Noirtier rearranged his hair. Instead of his black cravat, he took one of a different color, which was laying on top of an open trunk. Instead of his blue button coat, he slipped on one of Villefort's, which was brown and flared. In front of the mirror, he tried on the young man's hat, with its turned-up brim, seemed to find that it suited him, and, leaving his rattan cane where he had rested it against the fireplace, he took a little bamboo switch, that the dandyish deputy prosecutor would use to give himself that offhand manner which was one of his main attributes, and twirled it in his wiry hand. "How's that?" he said, turning back to his astonished son after completing this sort of conjuring trick. "Do you think that your police will recognize me now?" "No, father," stammered Villefort. "I hope not, at least." "My dear Gerard, I rely on your prudence to dispose of all these objects that I am leaving in your care." "Indeed I shall not." "Oh, father, have no fear. said Villefort. Indeed I shall not. And now I believe that you are right, and that you may have indeed saved my life. But rest assured, I shall shortly repay the service. Villefort shook his head. Don't you believe me? Well, I hope at least that you are mistaken. Will you see the king again? I may. Do you wish him to think you have the power of prophecy? Those who prophesy misfortune are unwelcome in court, Father. Yes, but they are more justly treated in the long run. Suppose there is a second restoration, then you will be considered a great man. So, what must I tell the king? Tell him this. Sire, you have been deceived about the mood of the country, opinions in the towns, and the spirit of the army. The man whom you in Paris call the Corsican ogre, and who is still called the usurper in Nevers, is already hailed as Bonaparte in Lyon and as Emperor in Grenoble. You think he is being hunted down, hounded and fleeing, but he is marching as swiftly as the eagle, which brings back with him his soldiers, whom you believe to be dying of starvation, exhaustion, and ready to desert, are increasing in numbers like snowflakes all around a snowball as it plunges down a hill. Sire, leave France to her true master, who acquired her not for gold but by conquest. Leave, sire, not because you are in any danger, your adversary is strong enough to spare you, but because it would be humiliating for a grandson of Saint Louis to owe his life to the man of Aracle, Marengo, or Austerlitz. Tell him that, Gerard. Or, rather no, tell him nothing. Conceal your journey. Don't boast of anything that you intend to do or have done in Paris. Take the coach, and, if pounded on the road in coming, fly like a bird as you return. Go back to Marseille. At night, enter your house by the back door and stay there quietly, humbly and secretly, and, above all, harmlessly, because this time, I promise you, we shall act as determined men who know their enemies. Go, my son, go, my dear Gerard, and provided you are obedient to your father's orders, or, if you prefer, respectful of the wishes of a friend, we shall allow you to keep your office. Noirtier smiled. And this will give you an opportunity to save me for the second time, should the political seesaw one day raise you up again and pull me down. Farewell, my dear Gerard. On your next visit, stay with me. At this, Noirtier left, calm as he had been throughout the length of this difficult interview. Villefort, pale and troubled, ran to the window, parted the curtains, and saw him go by, tranquil and unmoved, between 2 or 3 sinister-looking men who were stationed by the boundary posts or at the corner of the street, and who may well have been there to arrest a man with black whiskers, wearing a blue coat and broad-brimmed hat. He remained standing where he was, holding his breath, until his father had vanished beyond the Carrefour Bussy. Then he rushed to the things that Noirtier had left behind, thrust the black cravat and the blue frock coat into the bottom of his trunk, twisted the hat and concealed it in the bottom of a cupboard, and broke the rattan cane into 3 pieces, which he threw into the fire. He then put on a traveling cap, called his valet, giving him a look that forbade him to ask any of the 1,000 questions that were on his lips, and settled his account with the hotel, leaping into the carriage which was waiting for him, with the horses already harnessed, learnt in Lyon that Bonaparte had just entered the Grenoble, and, in the midst of the turmoil that he had found throughout the whole length of the road, arrived in Marseille, a prey to all the agonized feelings that enter a man's heart when he has ambition that has been honored for the first time.